That's not right. Try that again. Got a new toy. Welcome back to the Outskirts Podcast with Tanner and friends. Why am I hunched over? Because I need to adjust my stool. I'm Tanner, and yesterday I had an interesting interview with my new friend Rick Hansen, author of this book, The Blue Lady, My Personal Encounter with Dark Angels, Demons, and Spiritual Warfare. It was a fascinating discussion. Rick was raised by a former Satanist who converted to Christianity and then began performing thousands of exorcisms in Southern California. Without further ado, here's Rick. Okay. So, Rick, just introduce yourself and I didn't put any forethought into this. Usually I do an introduction, but I was
Okay.
thinking from it, like a lot of times what they'll do is they'll be like, my name is Rick Hansen and some kind of hook intro. And
Yeah.
my dad was a Satanist when I was or I discovered my dad was a Satanist when I was however years old. And
Yeah.
um you could probably throw one of those together on the spot right now.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so yeah, throw us an intro here.
Okay. Hey, good morning. My name is Rick Hansen. I've got a bit of a different story to tell than most, I guess you could say. I was raised by a former Satanist. We'll just start right there. So, just real quick, my dad was a Christian, became a Satanist, got out of it, became a Christian again, or found his salvation again, and then went on to become a Christian exorcist, where for the last 4 decades he's exorcised probably thousands and thousands of demons out of a lot of people all around the world.
Wow. So where's your dad located right now?
He's in Southern California,
Okay.
which is where I'm from originally. Born and raised in SoCal, both my wife and I. Like we were just chatting, surfers at heart. And so moved to Texas probably, I think this is year number 10. We've been in Austin for 10 years. Moved here for a startup where I was the EVP of operations and then have been here ever since working in global consulting as a tech lead for some large firms, usually top five consulting firms, and just trying to be a husband and a dad to my 3 kids and not melt in the summer here in Texas.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, I know I
Yeah.
failed on the last part miserably.
This summer actually wasn't as bad as last
Mm-mm.
summer. You
No,
probably
this has
noticed.
been super mild. This August has been brutal, but as the summer goes, it's been pretty nice.
Yeah. So that's the setting for this story. It's Southern California.
Yep.
What was
Yep.
what community was that?
Like like the county, you mean, or
Y-
how?
yeah, however you guys call it, like South Orange or
Yeah,
what?
so it was Ventura County, so we were about probably 45 minutes from downtown LA, and that's without any traffic, of course. With usual traffic, it's about a 2.5 hour drive.
Okay.
So yeah, we were born and raised in a small town. My parents are both from the Midwest, back in Minnesota. They moved out to Cali, probably I think is maybe 50 years ago or so. They were sick of the long winters. Both of them were teachers, and how it would go is they would have to wake up usually at 4 or 4:30 in the morning. One would go and sit in the car and start it and keep it warm, and one would make the coffee. And then they would switch and go back and forth like this because it was so cold and so brutal. And then one morning after a few years, they came back in, and I can't remember if it was my dad or my mom, but they said, "You want to move?" And they both went, "Yeah, let's go." And they applied to, I think it was 3 school districts or 3 areas, and this shouldn't be surprising to have that story: Southern California, Arizona, and Hawaii. anywhere where there was like minimal to no winters. And they both got a job in Southern California, and they picked up and moved and never looked back. So that's where I was born and raised. All their family on both sides are still back in Minnesota. So they're the only transplants, the betrayers of the family, I guess you could say.
Well, congratulations on having family in Southern California. When I go, I just have to stay in a tent or my van.
Yeah,
But must be
well,
nice to have a place to crash.
it is actually.
Yeah,
It is.
yeah. So, what decade does our story begin?
I mean, for my dad, probably in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
So quite a while ago.
Yeah. And just trying to think of kind of what was the general consensus on the supernatural and spiritual. Uh,
It was very
and
fringe. It was very
yeah,
fringe. There was a curiosity there, but it was a fringe group of people. If you fast forward to today, it's a light years of difference as far as the conversation goes, even though now with you know, a lot of the conversation is still, the supernatural is hocus pocus, but there's a lot of chatter about the supernatural on podcasts like this because of the digital era and all that kind of stuff. The story is much more rampant. Like that back then was very isolated, very, very niche, I guess you could say.
with the exception of you had like these cartoonish figures like LaVey and even Sammy Davis Jr., right? Who
Yeah,
was
yeah,
openly a Satanist, but
yeah, yeah,
it was like it's almost like a dinner party gag or something.
yeah.
It's just I don't I don't know how many people were taking that seriously at that time, but
Well, and both my parents were from, again, like I said, the Midwest, and also Southern Baptist. I think they're Southern Baptist or just regular Baptist, but they were, I mean, both were raised in a very conservative background, theologically in church. And, most everyone, again, I'm generalizing, but if you're in the Midwest, you're probably a Baptist or a Lutheran. And there was a lot of, people who would go to church. But, and they'd talk about the Lord and they would live, a Christian life, but it wasn't necessarily. It's like in Texas, everyone's a Christian in Texas, right? I mean, that's what they say. Except for
maybe
the
not in
fact that,
Houston
yeah.
or
Well, and
Austin.
also, yeah, well, Austin especially,
Yeah. I think
but
everyone's
yeah,
an alien in Austin.
yes, yeah, agreed. I think that would be the case.
But yeah, generally very Christian as
Yep,
far as the cultural influence and stuff for
yep,
it, maybe even like countrywide back in the 60s you had Catholics and Protestants and that those two forces probably influenced the culture in a similar way.
yeah,
It's like you're saying, like whatever the impact of Satanism was at that time, it was fringe
yep.
and maybe fashionable, but not practical. Um, so yeah, I'll give it back to you and just let it rip with who your dad, where he was in his life, and that transition, or how did he access that that worldview? Where'd the exposure come from, and then just
Yeah.
kind of the descent.
And let me set it up with, I think that's probably the most important part of this whole story, and probably the theme that I would hit on the most is how he got into it because it was slowly and it was like a drip campaign, which is how Satan typically works. For example, you don't see someone doesn't just decide to have an affair. There's a buildup. There's a disinterest in your partner. There's a loss of love in the marriage. You don't just decide to do drugs. You usually start to temper with it, see what it's like. So it's important to understand because that's how you become aware that this spiritual warfare is real. And what typically people look at and hear when they say spiritual warfare, they think of, A, it's probably mystical and not real, and or very isolated to stories like my dad. But I wanted, I'd like to harp on this in this podcast that it's everywhere and it's constant and it's always, and it's usually most effective when we don't think or see that it's happening. And so that's what happened to my dad. My dad, he became a Christian. He was young. Again, like I said, he was raised in a Baptist home. His dad was on the elder board, taught Sunday school. The family would go every Sunday. Highly visible in the community. And he was always very desirous of seeking the truth and finding the truth, not just kind of dabbling, not just kind of trying to figure out if it's real or not, but really like, okay, if this is real, I want to be part of it. And so when he made his commitment to Christ early, even though as a child, he was very sincere, and he remembers the moment to this day that it happened and the decision that he made. He was very cognizant of him making the decision and the want. Um, but he was also, just as a person, very fascinated with the supernatural. As a kid, obviously, it's, things like Superman. Not that Superman's evil, but that idea of another world, another thing that's out there, another layer to our existence. And so he was always intrigued by it and always, thought about all the while he was being raised in this Christian home that was very devout and very sincere about their faith and practicing it and living it. But he would start to experiment with things, as a younger kid, he was fascinated with things, like you hear from kids today, tarot cards, let's say, or the Ouija board that would seem like a game, but would just kind of like fascinate your psyche of like, whoa, this is kind of trippy, but it's just a game, and you don't really think much of it. But stuff like that, he would start to tinker with, and then the ideas and the thoughts. And fast forward to him growing up as he pursued the Lord still, went to college. He was very involved in the school. It was a Christian university. That's where he met my mom. Played football, was a wrestler. He had a beautiful voice. He was in the choir, was in a quartet, Bible studies, etc., etc. Very purposeful in his engagement with things and other people. Very gregarious, loved by everyone. He has a real gentle heart and is real thoughtful of people, which is what drew my mom to him. He was loved and also very outgoing and fun. But inside there was this wrestling, I think, with like, okay, if this is it, what else is there in it, and how do I explore it more? And what if there's more? So again, like I talked about, there's this drip campaign that if you Satan knows our weaknesses, our propensities, our cracks in the armor, I guess you could say, and they know how to drill into it and to pull a thread all the way through that again and again and again and again, because they've studied the souls of mankind since inception, and so they know us. And they've also been assigned to study us as individuals. And I know this sounds really weird, but that's what, if you read through scripture, that's what he does. He seeks around on the ground like a lion, seeking whom he may devour. They're always on the hunt. So the thread in my dad was this fascination with the supernatural. Later in life, after college, he went through, and as a younger kid, and I think it was through college as well, went through several big church splits where he really started to watch and look at man and how he or she represented God. And so he started to define his perception of God through what he saw through man, which is what most of us do. That's why a lot of people are angry at God because they don't like what they see in other Christians. We are very good at being hypocrites and inconsistent because that's just who we are as people. But Satan uses that to exploit his enemy, which is God. And that started to feed my dad like, wait, I'm interested in the supernatural, but Christianity seems really screwed up, really messed up. And again, like I said, he was never half in. He always wanted to be 100% in on something. So as his disillusion grew and as the curiosity grew, he started to test more things and open his mind up to more things. Again, you can see the drip as it comes. It just starts slow, but it escalates. The more we give into it, the greater the foothold we give Satan and his tactics and his strategy to exploit our soul. And so he married my mom, who was his college sweetheart. They're still married. I think it was 60 years this year, that they've been married. And he started to like really get into this disillusionment with his faith and started to poke around and started to do a lot of reading of world religions and studying things like astrology and Eastern mysticism and Eastern religions to see what else is out there. Read a lot of books, did a lot of studies, a comparative religion study, you could call it. And he always saw a good and an evil. It didn't matter, what he studied. There was always kind of a right and a wrong, a good and a bad. And so he started to really, again, open up his mind to the thinking of that and how that might look and how it might play out. So he read all these stories. At the end of his study, um, and this is where it gets deep pretty quickly. His, like I said, his disillusionment was growing. He was at our house in SoCal, and there was a channel on the news that was doing documentaries or specials on crazy trends in Hollywood, which are still a ton. But at that time, it was focused on, the rampant use of drugs, porn, and then occult or Satanism. Those are three separate specials, apparently. He happened to be walking down the hall and he heard a voice say, I want you to go and turn on the television right now. He's like, well, that's weird. And then he heard it again. And he went and he turned on the TV and one of these documentaries, again, he didn't know that, but looking back now, he didn't know what was going to be on, what was showing. But right as he turned on the television, what materialized was a documentary on Anton LaVey, who was the founder of the Satan Church out of San Francisco, and they were filming him lead a satanic worship service. So right in the middle, as he turned it on, it was in the apex of the sermon, I guess you could say. And he listened to it and very skeptical at first, like, oh, come on, this is hocus pocus, because it was so opposite of what he had seen and grown up in. But yet, because of this interest in the supernatural, he was curious to keep watching. And he could see kind of similarities in the service. Again, very dark, very gruesome, but there was a message, there were symbols on the wall, pentagram, upside down cross. But there was a preacher, essentially, like he'd known growing up as a Baptist. But he was talking about things obviously completely contrary to what he knew, but in that same type of tone of praise and adoration and intensity. And he was drawn to the intensity of the service and also to the preacher at the time, Anton LaVey. And but he was still very skeptical. Like, come on, this is a joke. This can't be real. But then he said at one point when Anton LaVey, and I'm not giving glory to this. This is just a part of the stories. This is important to know. As
Yeah.
Anton LaVey in the sermon essentially stopped and started to pray, raise his hands like a believer would praying to the Lord, but started to exalt the evil one. He was mesmerized by the depth of this person's expression of his faith, although extremely dark. And it reminded him of watching Billy Graham when he was younger and growing up, pray to the Lord. So he saw something there to him that was real. And he kept watching. And then all of a sudden there was a switch that flipped. Basically, he's like, this might be real. This might be the thing that I'm looking for. And it was then that he said, in the moment of the sermon, he's like, Satan, if you're real, I want you in my life. God, I don't want you anymore. I want you out. And he said he felt an instant hatred towards the name of Jesus, which is, again, really important for the story. Not that there wasn't hatred towards God, but it was Jesus specifically, because that's when the demon, his first one, entered him. And of course, the demons hate Jesus because they know that they are defeated by him. And ultimately, he has the authority. So, but he had this vehement hatred towards Jesus. And again, like I said, my dad is loving and kind and gentle, doesn't have a hateful bone in his body. When that manifested in him, it's very unusual for my dad to feel that. Even to this day, he's just still just a gentle man. But he talked about that hate as he could taste it, and that's when the demon entered him. Because again, he gave him full access to himself and a verbal, open door to Satan, I want you in. God, I want you out. It was very, very decisive and very clear. I'll
Was
pause there.
was he immediately aware that he'd been inhabited by a demonic entity?
He didn't know
Or
what it was, but he knew there was something unusual that just happened to him physically and spiritually, and he felt it in his body.
yeah, he felt a change. A-
100%.
And that kind of affirmed him and encouraged him towards whatever unfolds.
Because it was tangible. It was like,
Yeah.
with our pursuit of the Lord, he wants us to choose to follow him and to love him because we believe. And sometimes he'll intervene, sometimes he'll speak to us. We may have an ailment that he never heals, but that doesn't mean he's not there. He just draws us closer. Satan works completely opposite. He knows that for us to stay with him, he's got to give things and tease with things and infuse with things so that we're caught and mesmerized by the physicality of that sensation, because we as humans we're intellectual by nature. And so things we touch and taste and see and feel, we therefore believe is real. And so Satan knows that in order to keep us, he has to entice us again and again and again. So that feeling that he had was palpable and real. And I'm not saying God doesn't give us that, but God doesn't want our relationship with him based upon those things. Hence, when he would perform a miracle, he would always say, don't go and tell people, because I don't want them to be enthralled by my powers. I want them to be enthralled by my grace that I bring to the people. Anyway, so yeah, he felt something powerful and that excited him. It got him real excited. But he went to bed that night excited and hopeful, I say, hopeful like in quotes. Again, I know a lot of these things sound weird talking in such a dark story of hopeful and faith and prayer, but that's what happened. But he woke up that next morning very void of any sensation, very like, why don't I feel anything? And he was really discouraged, really bummed out because he thought that this thing that he found, that he felt last night, this power, this thing was going to start to lead him to, this new amazing, place. But he felt nothing initially, and he had a reaction like, just another scam, just another joke, just another thing that I fell into that isn't true, that isn't whatever. And so, but over time that changed as he again made the decision. That spirit that he brought into his life willfully was there. And when we let those spirits in like that, small door, small opening the door or open the door wide open like he did, they fester and they grow, and that's where they start to get their strength. So that sensation of nothingness was filled later by something that started to change his mindset of what was really going on inside of him and this other power. I'll pause there. Do you have any questions, thoughts?
Do you think that, well, first of all, I just want to say I can relate and sympathize to his situation and the longing. We live in this material world and it can be very boring.
Very,
And
yeah.
and religion in Christianity, the institutions that have sprung up in that name and the practices and the hypocrisies. It can be very jading, and I I relate very well to the desire for the bush to start talking, you know?
Yeah, right.
Like,
Yeah.
it's a pretty consistent prayer where we want to hear from God. We want his speech, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just in my heart, like I'm feeling for your dad.
Yeah.
And I can even understand the temptation, you know, to reach out into the void for any answer. Um, but let's continue to hear about why that's the wrong choice
Yeah.
and how dangerous that can be.
So he started to, delve into it more and more through readings. He was a an educator, a school teacher for his whole life, taught for I think he retired after 40 years of teaching. And I say that because what started to happen is that his students, unbeknownst to them or to him, started to bring him books on the occult, on astrology, on signs, on all this stuff that would start to you know feed his curiosity. And he at first thought it was a coincidence, but what happened is that now that Satan had a mighty foothold in his life, he would literally use the students to bring him books to start to satiate this curiosity and draw him intellectually into the darkness through these readings. Because again, at first he thought it was, oh, that's random. But then almost every day, a different student would bring him a different book on stuff that would scratch that itch of him wanting to know more about the other side. And and then in the process, he became more and more curious. And again, like a believer who finds the Lord and is fascinated by the grace he or she's been given, you start to pray, and you say, Lord, open my heart and search me and know me, and you seek him. But he did the same thing, but with the spirits, because he was getting fed by this stuff. And so he started to worship and to fellowship, and he got deeper and deeper into it through a spiritual sense, and through a calling into the darkness to manifest and to show him things, and to to be a part of his life. Again, it's even hard to say that because that's what it's more type of the language that a believer would use when you're talking about the Lord. But he was, again, one thing that I love about my dad to this day is that he has just always been after what is pure, what is true. And obviously he was horribly maligned in this journey of his, but he's always seeking the essence of what is out there and what's real and what this life is about. So that's why his when he got into it, he was so deeply entrenched in it, and he didn't want to be part of an occult or a coven or a community because he'd seen that been abused before. So he just dove into it himself with the spirits, with Satan, and he'd come home from school and just dive into long hours of prayer.
Wow. So I was thinking about what type of books the students might have been bringing him. Are we into the 70s at this point, or
Yep. Yeah.
so it was the new age was kind of really flowering at this time in the wake of all the uh Beatles albums.
Yeah. Correct.
But
Yeah.
not just them, but you had Carlos Castaneda, right, on the
Hmm.
scene, and I don't know if he'd risen to prominence at that time yet, but
I can't remember.
that's I'm just, the kind of hippie movement was very much rooted in New Age, kind of a loosely interpreted spirituality that maybe is strongly associated to Hinduism or
Yeah.
Buddhism or sort of a less well-defined spirituality. And so
Yep.
so he was weaving these things together, looking for meaning
Yep.
and practical application to his own life, but he was still holding on to Satan. as a central deity
Yes.
privately.
Yep. Yep.
That's really interesting. Because a
Privately
lot,
so that
I was just going to say he
no,
usually I think it's a lot of people's experience that they're doing these new age, prayers, rituals, ceremonies, practices, and all the while never making the association. But
correct.
I think it's kind of rare that he knew that the association was there
Correct.
and he proceeded accordingly. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. He proceeded with great intention, for sure. But to your point, a lot of those things that you were talking about, was being fed by kids, his students, whose parents were into that stuff. And so the books that they got, they were from their parents. And so some of them, many of them, it turns out that during the 70s and 80s, I think, witchcraft was a big deal. It's making a resurgence now. I mean, you can see it much more on open display now, especially for kids. But back then, a lot of his students were second, third generation witches from their parents. And so the homes, um, during that time had a lot of content that the kids were used to. And
Wow.
so they would,
Yeah.
and so Satan would use those students and the parents to feed my dad's curiosity. And you can see, again, I'm not glorifying Satan, but scripture talks about how shrewd and crafty Satan is, and that he has a strategy that is not to be tampered with. He's very smart. So even if you look at that, how all those steps that he played my dad again and again and again to cause him to be pulled deeper and deeper into, the cauldrons of hell, through little steps. Again, whether it was a book from one of his students, again, like you're thinking junior hires, they're innocent and they're bringing him these books. You don't think anything of it. But again, Satan is so strategic and wile in his way that that's how he moves the needle forward without you even seeing it. But because my dad's search was so intentional, he would take it and read it, but Satan knew that was the breadcrumb that he needed for that day. And then he'd bring him another breadcrumb, and then another one, and then another one. And my dad in the process would just, his faith would be encouraged. And so he would continue the pursuit. And yeah, so he got deeper and deeper into it. Again, like I said, my mom never knew until he was out, and he was in it for probably 2 years because he kept it a secret and kept it private. He'd still go to church, but his countenance, his demeanor, the lovable guy that I talked about, started to become a very angry, bitter, cynical, mean man, that was not who she married. That's the only thing that she recognized over these years. And it became very, very hard for her because what's important to understand, again, another bit of the story that is, I think, essential to the whole story is her faith. Because she, almost to the day that he got involved in Satanism, she got involved in what was called back then Bible Study Fellowship. I think it was a national movement, but it was a very intensive Bible study, and she'd meet once a week with I think it was a group of women, and they would just devour the word. They'd go into the scripture and do like deep studies of the scripture. So as her faith was being rooted deeper and deeper and deeper in the Lord, his faith on the other side of the fence was going deeper and deeper into Satanism. And so those two parallel paths leading to opposite ends became real important because if not for that, I don't think my mom could have lasted because, she's a very gentle spirit, but she's also got a very deep, simple faith. And I'm not even sure if she could handle knowing what he was going through during that time that she could afford to stay because it'd be, too dark. But she just kept praying and she never preached at him, even though she was just so discouraged about their marriage and what he was becoming. All that she would do every night was place a Bible on his bedstand. That's it. I mean, she'd pray for him, obviously, a bunch and ask her parents to pray, not knowing what was going on, but she would lay that Bible by his bedstand every night, just to, let him know this is these are your roots. Um, so he would get, as his journey continued deeper and deeper into it, as like I said, Satan gives us things so that we stay with him because we're physical beasts. And, he started to give him powers. And what I mean by powers, I don't mean he could fly like Superman, but he could start to read people's minds before they spoke, know who was on the phone before they would call, what the person was going to talk about on the phone before they called, know who was going to come to the front door before they came, what they wanted. And he would validate that by when, he'd answer the phone. I bet you want to talk about this. The person would go, yeah, well, how'd you know that? So it wasn't just, again, I know this is going to sound weird to a lot of people, and they may say, oh, that's hocus pocus, which is fine, but that's the truth. That's what happened, that he kept stringing my dad along with greater and greater powers such that he was able to start to almost manipulate the minds and thoughts of other people through his mind and his thoughts and have them, you know, do things like he'd be at a gathering and he would feel Satan say, tell this person to move left, tell this person to move right, tell this person to walk backwards, tell this person to walk forward. And every time after he would do that, the person would do that. Was it a,
He's just expressing intent, but he's not telling
yeah,
them. He's in his
correct.
mind, he's
In his
thinking,
mind, silent thoughts, person X, take 4 steps backwards. Person Y, take 3 steps to the right. And he saw that happen multiple times. And again, that sense of power, that sense of supernatural was intoxicating and scary for him. Um, because what he wanted to, his whole goal of this um, was to find a peace, which sounds really ironic that he would think that there would be peace in this type of blackness. But he was, obviously defining peace in the wrong way. He thought that peace would be, a sensation of power, a sensation of greater fulfillment for himself, satisfying thoughts, whims, desires, all that kind of stuff. Um, but as his power started to grow, he also started to feel, and again, as those powers grow, the demons take more and more control of you because you're increasing their authority in your life. You are giving them more land to occupy, and so they become more powerful. And he started to notice that they were becoming not just sources of influence, but they were becoming sources of control and chaos. Yes.
let me interject with a thought and tell me if you just address it succinctly. Say, yeah, that's right, or probably not. I just want your opinion. So, your dad's in a gathering. He's falling under influence from the demonic. They're telling him, you see Bob over there? Think for Bob to move left. Would it require or would it suggest that Bob is already at a greater level
Yeah,
of
good question.
control? Because the demons are telling Bob, move to the left, Bob, and he has no choice but to do it. Is that what's suggested?
Uh, yes, or it could be the fact that the person doesn't even know what he or she is doing when my dad had the control over them. So I don't know, to be honest. I just know that the outcome was a result of his power increasing and somehow, in some way, those spirits also having some type of influence over the person he was trying to control.
Yeah. Does it, could you be manipulated by the demonic in such a way? Would you hope that you can't be because of your degree of surrender to Christ? Or is there a level of protection that makes you, no, they can't manipulate this guy. They gotta,
Yeah,
they're not choosing Rick. They're choosing Bob to pull this trick off.
right, right.
That's kind of that's my take on it.
I
But
mean, no, it's a great, it's a common question. I think of Job specifically, and how, and also the Last Supper, I think it was in Luke, where Satan has to go to God to ask permission to influence someone for his whim. And God has to give him the green light to do whatever it is he wants to do. Job, is a huge example in the Bible. Satan wrecked his life to try to prove, that this guy was going to fall. And God said, you can do what you want with him up to a point. And Satan did that. And then God said, that's enough. So, I've seen, I don't know, let's say this Bob, like you talked to him, maybe he had a propensity already towards this, or maybe he was, had a moment of weakness, or it was just allowed for the moment. I don't know. There's just all kinds of things that it could be. The conjecture of the question, which is fair, is always, well, I thought that we're protected if we're a believer, and how could that happen? And it's fair and it's true, but I do know that we live in a fallen world, and in this world, God has clearly given him authority as prince of this world. So he has a level of authority, not without God's approval, but he has a level of authority because of sin and our sin, that he does have the ability to manipulate things based upon Genesis 3.
That's fair. If he could influence Job's body to make boils appear, then maybe he could push Bob to the left.
Correct. Yeah.
But as
Or,
as a matter of will, seizing our will to where he has no choice, like he's mentally making a decision, and that kind of, it's like I think of the marionette. Like it seems
but
like
how often do you think your thoughts are influenced by the dark side
that's a
that that
horrifying question.
that has you do things based upon your will,
Yeah.
not because you're evil, but because we're human and we live in a fallen world. Not that
Yeah.
he can, there's the question, is he able to read your thoughts? That's another thing. And there's a lot of debate over that, which I don't think he can, but he knows how to manipulate our thoughts because he studied us and he knows exactly where we're weak and when we're weak and what we think about the most. Like there was a study done, I think it was at Stanford, I talk about it in my book, where they studied the human brain, and on average, a person has about 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day. 90% of those are repetitive, and 80% of those thoughts are generally negative. That's a study. So if you think about that, 80% of 80% of our 90% of repetitive thoughts are negative. Satan knows that. And so he can manipulate us to the extent that we are, vulnerable or open or whatever. So,
Wow.
there's lots of layers you can go down into this. And I know as Christians, we typically want an answer that's like, well, no, he can't because I'm God's. And I don't want to minimize that and don't want to say that's not true. But I've seen myself, who knows the battle intimately, do things by my will that are sinful and wrong and
Yeah.
whatever it is, anger at my wife or, you know, whatever it is that so anyway,
I'm comfortable with that. Yeah. By my will. That's where I'm comfortable resting, right? I make bad
yeah,
choices. I'm
yeah,
influenced. I always think back to screw tape letters when I'm
great,
trying to
great
understand
book.
what's
Yeah,
what's happening to me. Like what am I thinking that or
yeah,
I feel like by my will I can um pray and increase disciplines and gain dominion over my thought life. Um or by my will I can, be lazy and sinful and be manipulative, malleable, be easily
yeah,
manipulated.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll have
Well,
to pray
and
for Bob.
yeah, the infamous Bob. But like to your point, there was a part in Screw Tape, great book, by the way, amazing, where again, this is important to understand because, as the character, I think the character's name was John. Again, the senior demon was trying to teach the junior demon how to manipulate his pupil such that he stays away from God. That's the ultimate, that's the assignment, to keep him away from God at all times. And if you can, make his soul bitter so that he never goes to God. But as you read in the story, it was again it was the drip campaign. It was never a shout. And on one example, he was in a museum looking at a painting, and the painting caused him to start to think about God and the wonder of God. And Screwtape told the junior demon not to not think about the painting, not to not think about God, not to think about the atrocities of evil, but to say, "Hey, isn't it lunchtime? Aren't you hungry?"
Yeah.
And he went, "Oh yeah, man, I'm hungry," and left. And it stopped his wonder, his fascination with the potential of God. And again, that may seem like a horrible, stupid example, but I think it is spot on. And I think that's the stuff that happens 90% of the time that we just miss, but he intervenes and causes us to whatever. I mean, for my dad, for him to see Bob move like that exploded his faith and drew him in. So does he have influence over our lives? Heck yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I understand that, and you've said several times you don't want to glorify the devil, but I think it's worthwhile noting that the devil does have this power. First of all, that he's real. There's a real entity. It's not just, it's not like the bad guy of the gaps, like you have the
Hmm.
god of the gaps and we have the villain of the gaps,
Yep.
where that's how we explain typhoid or whatever. No, there's a devil, and I think that's beneficial to understand that. And then,
Well, this is where I think it goes to your point. And if I could hover here for just a minute, this is
yeah,
so important because from my experience, back to our buddy C.S. Lewis, he says that the fallacy of the church is either talk too much about him or talk too little about him, either of which Satan is very satisfied with the outcome. Because if you talk too much about him, there is an over fascination with the evil, and you get trapped in where is Satan? Is he under every rock? And oh, that thought, that's him, or she is doing this, and that's Satan. Everything becomes this diabolical discussion with yourself of the power of Satan. That gives him too much glory. The other side of it is that the church typically, because of that, is too scared to talk about it at all because they think it gives him the glory, and that when you talk about it, stories like this, it only gives him, recognition for his powers. But Scripture talks about the warfare, angels, demons, the actual war, statistically more than he talks about marriage, which
yeah,
is which is fascinating because all you hear about in church is marriage and who you're going to marry and marriage, which is important. But if the war is talked about more, meaning we need to understand it, like if you think of the military, no general goes into war without knowing how his enemy works. He'd be a fool and he wouldn't be a general if he didn't study the ways of his enemy so that he could win. So
that's a great point. Yeah,
we as Christians have to know that he's out there, that he has the authority. It says that he's the prince of the air, but that we are more than conquerors through Jesus on the cross. And that's the most important part because then that gives, when you think about the battle, you're like, oh, we've already won. Satan is going to attack me. He is attacking me. He is going to do this. He is going to cause me this or that. But a lot of times too, it's like, well, I'm sinful and he's using my sin against me. So my point is, we have to know about this stuff in order to walk faithfully with the Lord.
Yeah. That I love that quote of Lewis also. The context I remember was, or maybe even specifically, he said, "You're in danger of becoming either a materialist
Yep.
or a magician,"
Yep.
which was the trap your dad fell into, right?
Hmm.
So like, I'm less concerned with, I mean, I'm very familiar, having um, really looked hard and thought a lot about all the language around they love to talk about the satanic panic, right?
Hmm.
They say, "Oh, that's not real." That never happened. That's just a bunch of people, and so that seems like a beneficial and obvious tactic if Satan is real. He creates a straw man and then
Hmm.
lets you, do away with it. Meanwhile, he's still there and he's operating in all these nuanced ways. But I think it's I think it's obviously not helpful to the cause to accuse everything of being demonic.
Correct.
But 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 the danger of being drawn to the supernatural to the degree where um, you become a magician.
Hmm.
That's like what happened to your dad. That's the one that resonates with me, because that's where my fascination has always been. It's fascinating,
Yep,
the
it is.
supernatural, and the work of our faith is work, and it's uncomfortable
Sweat
and
and toil.
yeah, and it can feel alienating and monotonous and I've probably spent most of my life doing it very wrong. I'm sure there's, you know, it's not, I don't mean to imply that I have done everything correctly and found it difficult or wanting, but I'm just saying my experience has been that it's hard and I understand the temptation to want to engage with something magical, you know,
Hmm.
and intellectually it's a lot of work to see the magic in creation because we're here, you know. But I think that's where the spirit does a lot of work in me, where it allows me to um, be a part of that magic. Um, where my role is just faith and hope and patience and waiting on the Lord, you know.
Hmm.
And in those special moments, I'm able to see the beauty and the magic of nature and all those things that annoy me to hear
Hmm.
secular people talk about,
Yeah.
like DeGrasse Tyson, we're made of stardust. Isn't that wonderful? Not really. Not if there's no soul. Like that
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
do that's not the magic I'm looking for. Like,
Yeah.
um, you know, it's the image of God upon us and what does that mean? And the faith that we're after as Christians, if we're seeking truth, I think it is full of magic, but um not in the way that your dad was seeking at that time.
Yeah.
And not in the way that I've been tempted to seek because it's like I have this desire for control. I want to do the magic, you know?
Yeah.
And that feels reminiscent of what happened in the Garden of Eden. Um,
Totally.
but I'm gonna stop talking now. Let's get back to you and your dad story.
Where we leave off. So,
The
yeah, so the
the
power,
breadcrumbs, yeah,
yeah, the
he was
breadcrumbs. Yeah, he was eventually served a loaf of bread, I guess you could say, to really, really dive into it. And that's when he started to feel out of control. The thing that he wanted to be in control of and to seek and to master, he realized it started to control him. The voices in his head started to drive him nuts, literally. Um, But all the while, his faith kept on growing because Satan kept on giving him more. Um, uh, he knew, though, that to really enter into where he needed to get to, what he thought he needed to get to, was he had to break from my mom because my mom was the one that kept the faith alive in the home, and she was the bridge to his old life, to his faith. And so he was able to get into a trance where he knew that if he could get this form to materialize, a demon, a spirit, and she would come home and see it, that she would freak out and leave him finally. And she was at church when he was manifesting in this trance, and this form started to materialize as real as you are seeing me and I am seeing you. It was the face, like the cheekbones, the forehead, the eyes was starting to materialize. And then my mom called home from church and said, "Hey, I'm going to go to lunch with my friends." And of course, that phone call broke his trance and threw him into a rage because he knew he was experiencing a new level of power, and this was going to be the moment where he could truly be free into his new realm of the supernatural.
Wow.
And um, he was filled with rage and anger, and through the phone started to cuss and yell at God uniquely, even though he had rejected God, cuss and swear at God, took the Bible that was by his bedstand, slammed against the wall, kept on swearing and cussing at God. Um, and then, as powerfully filled with rage as he was, and in a tirade, he said a power came into his room that was ultimate strength and ultimate peace. And he just turned and said, "What do you want, God?" And he said, "I want you to pick up the Bible you just threw to the ground." And because he sensed a power, he was drawn. And because he'd known his peace and faith from a kid when he accepted Jesus, he knew that God was there. But he picked up the Bible and he started reading Psalms. And he read all of Psalms and he read all of Proverbs for several hours while my mom was gone. And for the first time in Psalms, as you know, it's a book of poetry and songs, but it's filled with the heart of man being frustrated with who God is. But yet the psalmist always goes back to, "But God, yet I will praise you and yet I will love you." And so he saw for the first time in the book of the Bible man communicating with God directly about his frustrations and his disillusionment and his irritation and his questions and his all the stuff that he had before that he never brought to God purely and honestly, with a clean heart like David did or the other psalmists. He started to realize that he had looked at God his entire life through the behavior of man and never one-on-one with God. Even though he became a Christian, he never he never had the comprehension that it was such an intimate relationship that we could vent like that. As long as we recognize still that God, I'm not saying we could say, "God, you screwed me over," but I mean, those Psalms, they were wrenching, from David. They were discouraging, they were heavy, they were hard, but they were also wonderful and joyful and full of praise. But it was laced with this intimate conversation that my dad had never seen before, and he was mesmerized by that. And then my mom came home, and he said, he met her at the door, and she was afraid it was going to be more rage, more anger, more, um, bitterness and cynicism at her and just his rage. And he said, I think something's going to happen tonight, and I need your help, And she was obviously cautious and like, "Come on, you've the last couple years you've been evil. What am I going to do?" That's not what she said, but that's what she felt. Um, but she was also very cautious, like, "Is this really you, Dave? Is this the man that I married that wants to change?" And so they went to bed that night, and my dad started to feel this horrible, horrible pain in his stomach, in the pit of his stomach, like knives were on the inside trying to rip out of his stomach. Um, and he just, he kept telling my mom, I don't know what's going to happen, but something's going to happen this evening." And so we started to pray because the pain was so bad. He said, "God, either take me home or take away this pain. I can't handle this pain. What do I need to do?" And he said, in his prayer, he said, "God, do I need to call an exorcist? Do I need to call, for help?" And he said he heard God say, "I am your exorcist." I will handle you this evening. And so he said, okay, God, what do I do? Like, I need help. I need you to free me. And he said, I need you to name the demons and call them out of you. He said, well, how do I do that? Like, how do I know the names of the demons? How do I know what they're called? How do I call them out? And he was reminded, of some missionary stories that he heard, growing up, where they would rebuke demons out in Africa in the missionary field in the name and the blood of Jesus Christ. And so, God said, you will know the names of the spirits. And at that point, the word fear came to him, and fear was his dominating demon. And demons' names are typically from their assignment on the person. So fear was the name of the demon that was on my dad. And he said, I rebuke you, spirit of fear, in the name and the blood of Jesus Christ, and you have to leave me. And he said, when he said that, he felt that pain that was in the pit of his stomach start to travel up through his chest and his throat and out his mouth and then out of him, literally. And my mom was right there, so she was, of course, freaking out, not knowing what's going on, because she was a simple Baptist from the Midwest. But she just kept on praying for him. And he that night exorcised from himself with the Lord 12 demons from him. And oddly enough, as they were being exorcised from him, the house kept getting colder and colder and colder. And my mom would go and turn up the heat, and the more she turned up the heat, the colder the house got as the demons were being expelled from him. So there was a physiological manifestation in him of the demons exiting him, being ripped from his soul, as well as the spirits in the house trying to screw with my mom's head about, this is really weird. What's going on? You're turning up the heat. It's getting colder. Your husband, all that stuff, kind of like a Hollywood, not, I mean, exactly like a Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
And so that's what started him. And sometimes the question is, as a Christian, I'll go start exercising things. And this is where I go, don't trample in that world, because it's a gnarly existence, and don't ask for it. But for my dad in this case, I believe, and we believe, after over 4 decades of him ministering to thousands of people, he learning how to exorcise demons from himself was God teaching him how the process of an exorcism works, and how the authority we have in Jesus is powerful. And so that was, my dad will say over and over again, and I will too, that had nothing to do with my dad's power, with the right words, with the right thing. It was the fact that he was teaching my dad who the true conqueror is, and that is Jesus Christ on the cross. And as Christians, we always talk about the forgiveness of sins, but we often exclude the power we've been given in his name because of his death and resurrection over evil, over the prince of this world. And that's how we win, through that story and through that cross. And so that was his first experience, understanding the depth of and the reality of what he'd done a couple years ago with Anton LaVey, to this point of, like, I have literal demons in me that I have to rip out of my soul through the power of Jesus Christ. And then he did that, and that's how he started learning about exorcisms.
Wow.
I'll pause there.
Wow. That's a common thing where, like, I don't know. It reminded me of a story I heard recently on a secular program that was recounting, I think it was an Episcopalian minister. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I was just there was a fuzz and now it's gone. I
Mm,
guess my audio cleaned up. So, um, yeah, just as basically a secular priest. He had very little faith, and he
yeah.
had this encounter with a woman he was dating,
Mm,
and you know, she started manifesting, and he had this roommate that had spent time in Africa, like you were saying, and come back with stories where the procedure that he recounted was these African ministers would, go to the possessed person and say, "In the name of Jesus, reveal yourself."
yep.
So, and then it would just start manifesting. So he was having this situation with this girl he was dating where she was depressed or having some anxiety. And he said, well, let's pray, And she wasn't able to say Jesus' name in her prayer.
Mm,
That's
mm,
another thing that I've noticed in collecting these stories. Um, and so he was like, wow, this is really getting weird. She can't say Jesus' name, She's like
mm.
she was involved in the church and led prayer meetings and had, you know, so he's like, well, could it actually be real? And so he then repeats that, in the name of Jesus, show yourself. And then she just full blown manifests, like
Yeah.
starts writhing. And he was just mind blown. He was like, wow,
Mm,
it's real. It's real.
mm. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
But
crazy.
he talked about her throat and how she was like grabbing at her throat as it was eventually leaving her.
Yep.
And that's bizarre to think about. That they take sort of a physical path through our anatomy.
Yep.
Um, but again, I've heard other stories just like that. And it's like at some point, all these people are telling a similar story. They don't know each other. They've never heard each other speak on the matter, and these details keep, emerging.
Reoccurring. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
statistically anomalous doesn't cut it at a certain point,
Yeah. Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just
Totally.
it's real.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that was after a 2-year period, and he was where was he in his career at that point, like midway through or
Early 70s. So no, I mean
okay,
yeah, so he retired early 90s, I think. So
oh, okay,
he was still like pretty fresh into his, you know,
yeah,
educational journey. So
S-
and go
still
ahead.
maintaining, still living a normal life on all other accounts.
Yeah, yeah,
But his
like I
his
said,
private life, his thought life, and at home, these things were starting to manifest and cause trouble in the home
yep.
with his
Well,
marriage.
and yeah, and during that time while he was with Satan too, I mean, he was still going to church with my mom occasionally.
Yeah,
And he'd sit there and he'd sing sometimes too because he had a beautiful voice and they'd ask him to sing and while he was doing that in his head he was like, because he had such a disdain towards Christians because he thought they were so weak-minded, weak in their belief that he would do it almost for sport to say, look, you don't know what I'm like when I leave here. I'm in a dark world, yet you think I'm just, you know, singing about God here for you guys, but you guys are such fools to think, you just don't know. And so, like for him, it
yeah.
was kind of a sport. But
It was
if I
it was
can
mockery. Yeah.
correct, which were the demons in him, obviously. Um, but a part of the story that is important to tell, and like my book is called The Blue Lady, like let me explain where that kind of comes from. When his power started to become stronger and manifest more, again, like I said, he was a teacher. He taught art and photography to school. So I mean, on a junior higher. So he was an artist himself. He had a studio in the garage, and he was at home, going, through his exciting phase of his journey, and he felt a power to go and paint something. And he told my mom, he's like, "Look, I'm going to go in the garage. I need you to stay out. I need to keep Rick out. I'm going to paint. When I'm done, I'm done. But don't let him in, and I don't want you in." So he went out to the garage, and he knew there was going to be some type of encounter. And he put up like a canvas on the easel, picked up his palette of paints, and he said as soon as he put the brush to the paint on the palette and his hand on the canvas, something overtook him and started to paint through him. And he painted what he said was the most beautiful thing he'd ever done before. And it was a portrait of what he called the Blue Lady, which was his guiding demon, which was the demon essentially assigned to him in his time. And so, because he was so excited by the manifestation of the painting, and because to him it was so beautiful and so amazing, and he knew that it didn't come from him, it came from outside of him, through him onto the canvas. And when he put the brush down, he knew that he had to bow to it several times and to kiss it several times, as though he was saying, you're the one in charge of me. So essentially, he was going even deeper into the layers of the cauldron by that act and identifying that thing. And what he would usually do with his paintings, and when he was done, as an artist, he would take it off the easel and go back to his bedroom and hang it on the wall at the end of his bed so he could look at it and kind of reevaluate his work from a new perspective, right? Whether you're a writer or a painter, that's just what you do. You take your art out of the context that you made it and you put it elsewhere and go, does this still resonate as something that I'm proud of? So he brought it back to the bedroom. He also wanted my mom to see it because he knew it would he hoped it would freak her out because of the power that he saw and felt in it, and he hoped that it would do that to her at some level. So we hung it on the wall and he said, honey, what do you think? And she looked at it and she said instantly, that thing scares the heck out of me. Get it out of the room now. And
Wow.
so he was so excited by her visceral response that he knew he was on to something more in his journey. So he took it out of the room and he hung it in a place in the hallway where anyone who would come into the house would be forced to look at it because he would want to see their reaction to it because he was so excited by this power. And he knew, like for him, it was kind of a secret. Like, look what I did and look what I have. And everyone who walks in is going to be freaked out, I hope. And it's going to show me again that I'm onto something and they're not. So he said every person that would walk into the house that would see the painting, they would say, that's the darkest, scariest thing I've ever seen. It scares the hell out of me. And they would say the eyes would follow, the person, or the eyes were so horribly powerful that they would scare, just by the eyes would scare the person. And so that, was his guiding demon. And he would interact with it throughout his faith and pray to it, ask it for things, etc. Fast
Wow.
forward when things got out of control for him, and he eventually tried to take his own life because it was so bad. And he knew the chaos was starting to control him, and he could no longer control things. He knew that he had to get rid of the blue lady, and he knew that there was something there that was holding on to him, and that's when he first started to tell my mom about it, not in all the detail, but look, I've been into this thing, and it's got to end. And he thought that that by ridding himself of that, all the crazy would stop, because like I said, it had gotten so out of control. And so they had called over another couple, very close friends, and wanted, support in the destruction of the painting. And so they were going to burn it in the fireplace. And he brought them over again back to the missionary stores. He didn't know how to do it, but he's like, I guess we have to get rid of this thing physically. Put it in the fire, didn't burn. It sat there in a large flame. Didn't scorch it, didn't scar it. There was nothing lighting up, and it was a good fire in the fireplace. And there was a corner of it that wasn't by the fire, so he pulled it back out, and that's when he like remembered the story of the missionaries. He's like, I wonder if I pray in Jesus' name over this and rebuke it, that it will go away. So he did that, and while it was on the mantle of the fireplace, he wanted to like literally destroy it. So he took a razor blade and started to cut, the canvas. And he said, as he was cutting the canvas, the face turned into the face of my mom, and the canvas actually started to bubble up tears from the eyes of the painting to screw with my dad's head. Like,
Yeah.
you can't get rid of me. You can't. Almost like remorseful, like to screw with him, but almost like the demon is like, you can't, I'm yours. You can't let me go. And then he rebuked it and threw it in the fire, and poof, up in flames. Um, and he
Was your
thought
mom
that,
there at that
yep,
time?
and this other couple, yep,
And they saw this? They
yep.
saw could wow. That's
So
amazing.
yeah, so that he thought would be the end of this, but because this is before he exorcised the 12 demons out of him, those demons were still allowed to be there because he did not rebuke them from him. And so they still had authority in him, on him, over him. So, the cycle started again. The voices, okay, I need to go back, the anger again. So it brought him back into where he thought he left. And so that was, important for him and important for others that the relics or the things that that we have, whether it's a statue or something from that we think is cool from a magic store. There is, not in everything, obviously, but there is an authority in things that do have influence over us and can influence us spiritually in a personal way. This was an extreme example, but just because you get rid of those, you still have to address the actions that you did to open up that door. Hence, fast forward to my dad's, 12 demons. That's when he learned he had to get them out of him, literally, and rebuke them and to take away that legal authority that he gave them. It's like like I heard someone talk about, it's like in a courtroom. You have to legally talk about how they are breaking the law, that you allowed them to break the law. And the only way it can be restored is through Jesus Christ on the cross. That's the authority that we have over those things. And and this Blue Lady is an important part of the story because when he was freed from those 12 demons and learned in that moment how to do, an exorcism and that the battle is real and that Satan is real and the demons are real but God is more powerful and he wants to hold our hearts and give us the victory and peace. He, I think it was a few weeks later, was teaching, and one of his students in his art class, came to him and said, "Hey, I did this painting last night that was just amazing. So excited about it. Never have done anything like this before. I wanted to show it to you and get your opinion." And the student showed my dad the painting. It was almost exactly the same Blue Lady that he had painted, you know, a long time before in his walk with the Spirit. So of course, then he, long story short, was able to pray with the student and talk to her about his experience. She became a Christian, and that was the first time where he then, aside from himself, started to minister to other people, and that's where the whole story technically launched from on the positive, where from that experience, God brought person after person after person after person that he'd minister with in a similar fashion that he was freed from to bring them to freedom for over 40 years. And in his 80s now, he's 84, still doing that to this day.
Wow. And you were in the home. Where, at what point did you enter the scene here? Were you around
So
when
I
all that
was
was going on?
there. I was there when he was going through his Satanism in the summers again because my parents are teachers. My mom would try to take me back to Minnesota where her family was and his family was just to escape him while keeping her job. So she'd go back to Minnesota with me for I think like a couple months on end because they were teachers. They had the summers off and stay back there, and then come back home to teach. So I don't remember that, but I was there. But what I do remember very early on is when his ministry was essentially in full force. Again, he would do this after hours. So he'd come home from teaching, and that's when he would perform these exorcisms in our house, in our living room. So growing up, as early as I can remember, I saw people coming to our front door that again, it talks about it in Psalms how the eyes are the window to the soul, essentially. You could see the darkness in the eyes. They'd come to the door, and that's when, he would, I mean, anyway, you got a question first before I go on, I
Oh
saw.
no, I was just the window to the soul thing. That's relevant, and I think about that every once in a while. Occasionally, I'll encounter somebody, and you don't want to judge people based on their appearance, but
Hmm.
there's a darkness of the eye,
Yep. Yeah, totally.
and you just like.
Yep.
But so I would love for you to just recount one of those stories. Like you're in Southern California. Your dad's just home from a long day at school. Your mom too, probably is. I see him grading papers. You're trying to watch, Scooby Doo or something, and then there's a knock at the door, and it's who is it?
So usually, I mean, I had seen witches come to the front door. I've seen people in very well-known motorcycle gangs come to the front door. I've seen, people who were pastors of churches come to the front door. Hollywood stars every now and then, pro athletes. And again, my dad never advertised his story, but it was word of mouth. There was no social media. He never went to anyone, but the story would always be, "Hey, I heard you're the guy who knows about demons. Is that true? I heard from someone who told me who knew someone, etc." The old telephone gang. And usually it would start on the phone. Are you the guy that deals with demons? Yes, I am. So and so referred me. And they would say, a voice told me not to call you or come and see you, but another voice told me to call you and come and see you. And so my dad would say, well, how come you're here? And he or she would say, because the voice that told me to come and see you was stronger than the voice that said not to come and see you. So it would be a mixture, usually in person, but sometimes on the phone. Um, and they would come to the house, they'd knock on the front door. And again, when you open the door, you could feel the darkness, but you could see it in their eyes and you could see it in their face. It was very heavy, very dark, very long. And then, they would introduce themselves. I'm the person you talk to on the phone, and come in the house, and then the commencement would start, and it was usually, I mean, every situation was different, every manifestation was different, every person was different, every story was different, but there was a pattern in every single one that was relatively the same. And they would say, that thing that a voice said to come, other ones said didn't. And then my dad, would sit them down, and go through like a typical kind of discovery process where he would say, how come you're here? What's your story? And they would talk about, usually they would say that I think there's something in me, or there's something so heavy around me that I need it out, or I need this thing around me gone because I can't function anymore. And as the person would tell his or her story, um, God would tell my dad, either it was a drip campaign like my dad had, or, there was a moment from the drip campaign that, the person would go and this happened to me. And my dad would say, well, that's probably where the spirit entered and that's where it started. Often also, and this is important because this, for me, always testified, and for the person always testified that they were dealing with God and not my dad or myself. As the story was being told, God would usually give my dad a word about the person that was pretty horrific. Something happened in that person's life that, would probably be important to tell. So, again, my dad had never met these people before. And when God would give him that word to say out loud, it was daunting because what if it's his imagination saying things, or what if it's a spirit lying to him about something? But 99.9% of the time when he would speak this thing out, whether it was a person who was molested or raped, or they did something at a party, or they did this or that, he would say, did this happen to you? I feel God wants me to tell you this. The person would usually, drop their mouth open and go, I've never told anyone that. How do you know that? And then my dad would say, I don't, but God does. And that would be the moment where the person would go, okay, this is God. I'm dealing with God, not Dave, but God is using Dave to help me be freed. And that would help the person open up even more and recognize that there was a spirit there. And if I can back up, every person that we have dealt with, one of the rules, I guess you could say, is that person has to want to be freed. If the person, even though they don't know what the freedom is or what the freedom from is or what it would look like, they have to want it out. They have to want to be freed, because otherwise, if the person's will is not involved in the exercise, because it is a battle, it is a physical, spiritual battle on the person, for the person, that's literally draining and exhausting, but the person has to want to be freed so that he or she can engage in that desire and learn to lean on God. It's a
Yeah.
waste of time. So, when they would, you know, acknowledged that the word from God was the word from God and if it had happened, that's when often the spirit would start to manifest more because the spirit knew it was outed. And when the spirit knows that we know that they can't be there, that's when the battle really starts physically.
Yeah, I was trying to remember what they call that in the Catholic rite. It's like the revealing or something. But
Yeah, yeah.
uh can you and you can you just give me like a quick story? Whether it's one that you remember or that you've heard told, whether you remember it because you saw it or you just remember it because, it was recounted to you by your dad in such a way that you kind of know what happened. And you can um obviously the person can remain anonymous or you can call them, Joe or whatever or Sally. But can you just walk me through a quick story of a time when somebody came to the house remaining in that specific context of that one person's life and who they were in the world ish and what happened and how did it turn out, you know? Like you said there were biker gang guys and Hollywood types and athletes. Like if you could pick one story that you wanted to tell that you thought was most gripping, um, which would it be?
For me,
Well, in your ministry, or I was thinking in your dad's. I haven't even
well,
gotten to the point where I don't even know if you're actually doing. Are you doing this too? Don't answer
uh,
that. Let's go back to your dad. So
okay.
yeah, so in the house you grew up in, where your dad was performing these exorcisms, just give me like a 2-minute walkthrough of a time this happened. Like,
Yeah, so I would sit in with him a lot when I was in my early teens, I guess you could say. I could hear them all the time in my house because, like I said, sometimes they're in the living room, sometimes they were later in life. His parents actually built him an office, an extension of the house because it was happening so much, and so he would do a lot of them in the office. But growing up, a lot of them right in our living room. Um, Reaching back into memories with my dad watching one, I do remember one where he spoke out that the girl was molested by her uncle, and he spoke that to her. And I had heard again. I was learning to understand and hear God's voice in times like this because you have to be very, very attuned to the situation. And because while this is happening, the spirits, Satan is trying to attack your mind as well to distract you from actually helping the person become freed from the Lord. So you're being, there's this onslaught in your head from the spirits who are trying to either make you afraid or bring up thoughts of the past or whatever they can at the moment to distract you. And so you've got to be like in the lane essentially. And I was, and how you do that is you just listen to God. You say, God, what do you want to do? Help me stay focused with this. And I can remember hearing him say things like that before that God said you were this or is this true about what happened? And he said that, you know, to this person and I had heard something like that in my head too and often when my dad and I were working together we would hear the same thing almost like a tag team which validated to us what God was talking about. And so I had heard something like that and he spoke it out and to see her reaction was amazing because I mean she literally went almost white and like how did you know that? Um, but then at that moment is when when I saw the switch flip where she had started to really open up and talk and realize that freedom was um, potentially there. And then, as she started to tell more of the story, we started to identify the spirits, and then we called out the spirits. And as we called out the spirits, she started to manifest. And then we taught her how to, as the demon was manifesting, how to get rid of it. But to see that moment that I want to emphasize that was important was to see the person recognize physically that God was talking to her personally through my dad and I, my dad in that case specifically. And then ultimately it led to her freedom, and she was, and and I'll say this was a common phrase, and she said this too. I've been in years of counseling. I've never felt the freedom that I feel right now after this moment of this battle. Not because my dad was great or because, whatever, but it was only because of what God did through my dad's experience, recognizing the spiritual war, that people were able to go, and again and again and again. I've never felt this type of freedom before. I finally feel free from this burden, and this thing is out of me. And so that, that was one reaction, but that was manifested in a million different ways through a ton of different people again and again and again. So, growing up, that's what I saw. I didn't see my dad in it. I saw my dad after it, acting like a warrior day in and day out spiritually, watching people be freed from the darkness.
What was the youngest? What would you say is the youngest possessed person that you guys worked with that
I,
you
I
remember?
mean, I don't know if I think he helped pray over kids for the parents before, but I don't, I'll have to ask him. I don't like remember young people that we dealt with. Now, he spoke a lot at churches. I will say that he spoke a lot at churches when I was older in my teens, and because there was a film that was made about him called Revival of Evil back in the day. It's on Amazon Prime still. It's from the
Wow.
80s. It was a documentary with five other people. He was one of five, where it documented their story. Somewhere in the drugs, somewhere in the cult, somewhere in Satanism, and it chronicled their story. And so that movie, like, it traveled across the country, and he would go often to the church that would show it, and would speak there. And then he'd speak at youth groups. They'd show the film at youth groups. And when he was speaking after the film in youth groups, and this happened almost every time, a kid from the audience would get up and ask a question that was kind of antagonistic about something, or say a comment, and you could tell that the demon spirit was trying to disrupt the whole room. And sometimes my dad would, from the stand, say, "I rebuke you, spirit," and the spirit would manifest in front of the whole group, and the kids. And so they were, it was youth group, and so they were in their teens. So I would say that's probably where I saw it in young people the most, was when he would speak like that. And sometimes they would manifest, or afterwards, people would say, same type of thing. Young kids would come up, I think I have something in me. My parents are this, and I'm that, and then like we'd pray over the kid, and they'd be free. There would be a manifestation.
What do they look
And
like?
then,
What's the manifestation looking like? Like what's if a psychiatrist were in the room, a secular psychiatrist, are they gonna just basically accuse you all of child abuse for not, calling the EMTs and getting them institutionalized or whatever the procedure is? You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, totally.
are these manifestations ever supernatural?
Always. Well, let me
I mean,
pause.
to the non-believer, are they manifesting in such a way that they've got no room to really speak with their authority as far as psychiatry
So
or
yes, there's always a manifestation, but to your point, sometimes it's more subtle. But mostly from the stuff that we were dealing with, um, because we'd call out the demons and knew them. And what's important to understand here is that when you pinpoint a demon by name, and it gets called out in public, and it knows that it's exposed, it doesn't know how to hide. So especially when you call it out in Jesus' name, because you're invoking authority that you've been given, that they are under. And so then they manifest. And typically, whether you're in a room with a lot of people, like when my dad was speaking, or we were in a smaller group where, they would bring a friend to watch. 90% of the time, when there were manifestations, it was undeniable that it was supernatural. The face would change, the eyes would change, the voice would change, they would bend the natural laws of the body, whether they would, get down on the ground and bark and snarl or bite at your ankle or slither like a snake or, you know, their bodies would contort and become something unnatural that you go, that's not normal.
Yeah. So those are things that the average person on the side of truth who's not biased towards, they're not anti-religious. So many people are, they worship science and scientism is a problem, right? And
Yeah.
it's prevalent. But if somebody starts floating, well, then they have no space for that. You know what
Right.
I'm saying?
Right. Right.
You floated. Okay, well, I'm just gonna, at some point you have to lie to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Correct.
so you've witnessed those moments where everyone in the room knows we're looking at a demon possessed person.
Correct. Hmm.
But
I
have
will
you ever
say though,
seen
too,
has
go
you
ahead.
have you
Sorry.
ever
Go ahead.
have you ever seen anything like levitation or like even like supernatural strength, right? So I know people who, and I've had stories where, a 80-pound old lady throwing 12 people off of her, right?
Sure. Yeah.
They will even try to explain that away with adrenaline, even though you, it's they're not honest about it, but they'll try to explain it away, right?
Yeah.
But there are certain things that you can't explain, like levitation,
Hmm.
or even just like, you know, things moving on their own. Um, that kind of stuff happens. And if I were the demonic, I wouldn't do that
Right.
because, you know, obviously
Then your
you
cover's
want
blown.
you
Your
want
cover's blown.
people in disbelief. Yeah. Yet it it happens if you believe eyewitness accounts, and again, at some point it's like all these people aren't lying, you know.
Yeah. Right.
And is that beneficial? If you see something like that, I think it is beneficial, and that's why the demonic doesn't generally behave in that manner, right?
Right. Yeah.
But but have you ever seen anything like that where you, if you were put on the spot, if you had to take an exam and you're given a checklist and it says, check everything that you know for certain there's not a scientific explanation for, you know? How many of the,
Hmm.
that's about it. I'm not doing this, sir, a good
I know
justice,
what you
but
mean.
you know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
Yeah.
Have you seen it? Have you seen the thing that would make or at least silence, you know, Neil deGrasse Tyson? I like to pick on him.
Before I answer, I drink a lot of water. Like, do you mind if I
Oh yeah,
take a
please,
bathroom
yeah.
break before we
I'm gonna do
end?
that too.
Okay.
All right, all right.
Okay.
Hi, friends. I hope you're enjoying this interview with Rick Hansen. I'm going to take this opportunity to remind you that Halloween is on the way and to ask you a very important question.
Have you seen the ghost of John? Long white balls with the skin all gone. Ooh, wouldn't it be chilly with no skin on?
Have you seen him? The ghost of John? A Bigfoot? Something weird happened in your home when you were a child. You can't explain it all these years later. We'd love to hear about it. We're putting together our Halloween series on the Outskirts podcast with Tanner and friends. Please email me outskirts at tannerandfriends.com. Back to Rick Hansen. All right, headphones on, got the hair flopping. Get this situated here. Okay, sound check. My mommy makes me macaroni. Here we go.
All right. We
Welcome back.
back?
All right.
Great, thanks. Feel much better.
Yeah, me too.
So the question was, have I seen like, is there one in particular that stands out? That's like a physical, like someone would go,
If you had to provide evidence for the supernatural, is there something that you would put forth as evidence above any other thing that you've witnessed?
I mean, I think the one that scared me the most was one that my dad and I did together when I was probably 14 or 15. Um, and it was through this lady got a hold of my dad who had heard about him from someone who knew someone who knew someone. And she had a friend who was really messed up, former pastor. And she had called a ton of churches from LA all the way down or to where we were going to church. And almost every church said, we don't know what to do with that. We don't have anyone. It's not our, call, or maybe so and so will help. Finally got to my dad's name, got a hold of him and said, would you meet us? And um, he said, yeah, sure, we'll come. And then this is at this guy's apartment. And he was a big guy to start with, tall, large frame. Um, but we met him at the door and saw that same, black heaviness in his eyes and his countenance, and just you could just feel the spirits that were there. Those were exceptionally powerful from a spiritual sense. Not that someone could walk in and go, "Oh, there's demons here," but I knew it, and my dad knew it just from our experience. We sat down. He sat on one side of the room. I sat on the other, and so the guy sat on his bed. It was a studio apartment. Again, like he was big to begin with, but we started to talk and started to pray, and you could just tell. I mean, he just his whole body started to just be agitated. He was wringing his hands on his bed like he was kind of gripping the sheets and squeezing his hands and rolling them back and forth. You could just feel the tension build. And from experience, we knew that's because he wanted freedom, but the demons were really strong and they didn't want out. And so my dad started talking to him. The guy would talk, but you could tell it's almost like a Marvel movie, like when the Incredible Hulk was, you know, like when Banner was trying to keep the Hulk inside, but the Hulk wanted to come out. It kind of, you know, that might make this sound kind of hokey pokey, but that's a visual that makes sense in
Hmm.
this situation. Um, and you could just tell the agitation was mounting. My dad was praying with him, and at one point my dad was helping him, call out the spirits, and then he stopped, and at one point he shot up out of bed just with this rage. And again, I was scared because I had never seen such a like a violent kind of display. And he stood up off his bed, and he grabbed there was a lamp and a clock, and he ripped it out of the wall, held it up over my dad's head like he was gonna smash my dad's head at the last minute. He threw it against the wall right by my dad's head. The lamp shattered, the clock shattered. I was freaking out. Um, and but my dad was as calm as could be because he knew that God was there to protect him. And I knew that, but as a kid, it's freaking scary.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, this guy is bit, large to be, or to begin with. But as the demon started to manifest more and more, at one point he got up off his bed. This was shortly after the lamp and the clock and explosion and heavy breathing, and his breathing kind of calmed down. But then it started up again. He shot up out of his bed again and went around over to the other side where there was a bookshelf, and there was a window here and a bookshelf here, and he just like he put one hand on either side of the bookshelf. And you could tell he started to breathe heavier and heavier. And he started to literally expand and grow. Not like just like from breathing heavily, but his shoulders expanded. He grew in height and his whole frame became bigger and bigger. And that's when I knew that he was going to try to, I mean, the demons are telling me he's going to take up that bookshelf. He's going to be huge, and he's going to kill you. He's going to kill your dad. Again, as I was watching him grow, this is I think the example that you want, because you can't argue with a human body expanding and growing. This isn't because he was flexing or because he was a weight lifter. It was growing. And it kept, his breathing increased, and his body was growing and growing. And my dad, kept on praying against the spirits and praying for protection. And as he was growing, and this is the part that I would see that, I couldn't, if someone was in the room, they might not see, but there was out the window I looked, there was a huge demon outside of the window, just in a black form, like a cloak, like you'd maybe see in like Lord of the Rings movie or something like that. But it was just like from the chest up, but it was this black hood shadowed over the face. You couldn't see the details, but you could see enough of it to know that there was an entity there that was very powerful. And so as he was manifesting in bodily form, I saw a huge demon manifest outside of the window. Didn't say anything, but just looked at me with absolute hatred and rage and power and authority. And those two really freaked me out, obviously. But that spirit eventually went away. He eventually, came back down to size. Again, I'm shortening the story incredibly, but came back down to size, sat on the bed, and that's where, that demon that was manifesting was the ruling demon in him that didn't want to leave. And what happens usually in exorcisms, there is a hierarchy in the spiritual world, and the ruling demon, if it's powerful enough, will usually make the lesser demons go, and that one will stay so it can reside, and the person will think that because a bunch of demons left, the person's freed. But what's happening is the powerful demon is just hiding behind all the others, and that's what had happened because he had been freed of a bunch of demons, but this big one was the last, and my dad knew it and called it out. Came back down, he calmed down, and that spirit was eventually freed from him in a powerful, like when they are praying against the demon in them and they're fighting, it's literally like watching a spiritual wrestling match of someone because your soul is engaged, your body's engaged, your spirit's engaged, everything's engaged to get that out. And when they're done, they are usually just exhausted, like just literally exhausted. But same type of thing when he was finally freed, you can see the glory of the Holy Spirit on him. His countenance had changed, his eyes had changed, and this big giant had become a teddy bear and was just weeping and crying and hugging my dad and hugging me and thanking us for what God had, just done in his life because he knew that he literally escaped death essentially. So, but the point of the story that was the gnarliest is when his body was growing,
Yeah.
and you just can't argue with that. But in the same hand, that one story, I saw that powerful demon, but in the same instance that I saw the demon and saw him expanding, God in my mind's eye showed me outside of the apartment where the road was lined with angels, one by one in a very articulate, almost almost mathematically precise, distance from one another, but they were lining the entire road. They were about 8 to 10 feet tall, each one of them, perfect, the same. And that was him saying, I got you. But we were in the midst of the battle. And that was the first time in my mind's eye that I had seen angels present in the fight. When it was over and we left and we got in the car, as we were driving out, I saw with my eyes the same angels that were on that road that I saw in my mind's eye when we were encountering the demon. I'll pause there.
Did your dad see them or
He didn't
just
see the
you?
angels, just me.
Yeah, so you were given this sight into you know, the other realm. Somebody just knocked on my door.
Sure.
I'm not even gonna open it. I have no, I have a blanket on top of there, so yeah, everybody's in school. Yeah. No thanks. Um, solar, probably selling solar.
Yeah.
So yeah, you were granted sight, you know, into the other realm, right?
Yep. Yep.
They're there. We can't normally see them, but you saw them, you were given like a vision
Yep.
as you were engaged in prayer. And then as you were leaving, it was like, yeah, they're actually, it was real. Like it was an affirmation of
Yep.
that kind of prayer site that you were given. That's
Yep.
awesome. That's really awesome. What did the angels, just describe one of them? You said they were uniform, but like what did it look like?
They were, like I said, 8 to 9 feet tall, we'll say maybe 10 feet tall, but they were all exactly the same height. They were robed in white robes. Swords were drawn like a soldier. They were not out hanging, but they were like drawn, close to their chest. And
Could
they're
you see like face and ears or what?
no,
I'm just
just
curious.
yeah, just a form, like their face was a form. It was a glowing white form. Like it wasn't blinding all around light, but it was blurring the face, the all the details. But you could see the arms, you could see the legs, you could see it, the robe, the person standing tall. And it was eloquent but really powerful. And you could feel their strength, and you could feel, and this may sound weird, but this whole thing is weird, but you could feel their obedience to the king and their service, to the Lord, that they were assigned to protect, and that they were ready to go when called. And it
That's
was it was
cool.
it was all, I mean, all of that was at once. So yeah, it was, and just a quick story, years ahead of time, we were my dad was speaking in Europe about his story, and we were in Sweden. Like we'd gone to Germany, France, Sweden, England, and he was speaking to a group in Sweden, and his story had gotten out, and so like the place that was supposed to be small was packed with people, and people were just flooding the place, and God said, Rick, I want you to go outside to pray for your dad. And as I was leaving, there was this guy that was there that was starting to agitate the crowd. Obviously, there was a spirit in him that was trying to mess up my dad's time in the crowd. He said, go outside and pray for your dad. And so I walked outside, and I stood outside the door, and he said, look left. And I saw the same angels. This is years later. I saw this. The angels looked exactly the same. They had lined all the way down the building on my left, and he said, look right." And I looked right, and they were lined all the way down the building on my right. But as opposed to being spaced like they were on that first story, they were shoulder to shoulder. Same type of thing. Left arm down, right arm with the sword up, looking straight ahead, protecting, ready to do warfare. So it's like I saw the same angels, looked the same, that same sense of awe and wonder and warfare that I saw when I was a kid at that guy's apartment.
Yeah. How old were you as a kid in that guy's apartment, roughly?
Pro- Probably 14 or 15.
Wow. Yeah. Just
Oh,
barely fighting age.
yeah,
Yeah.
up for a young kid.
That's intense. I've got a 14-year-old. He's just at that age where I'm like, yeah, planning the overnight camping trips, maybe,
Right.
and we're gonna just go do some man stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. What an age to be in that situation. I mean, how bolstering to your faith. Wow. I mean, yeah,
Both. It was daunting. But again, backing up, I had seen manifestations a lot in my house. And so on one hand, it was very normal. But on
that's
the
very
other
important.
hand, this one was especially scary. This is probably the first time I was literally scared,
Yeah.
physically scared, and worried.
Yeah.
And and for my dad, he said this is the first time he was worried too, because I was there in
Yeah.
that way, and he knew this was the heaviest one. But you know, and so that's why going wasn't a big deal until I got there and started to see things. It freaked me out. But this whole journey of mine, growing up in that, like you asked what it did to my faith, it made my faith more real than life itself, because I saw the battle again and again and again and again in a supernatural manifestation through a physical entity. And every single time, Christ won. Every single time the person was freed. Every single time the demon lost. And so when you read scriptures, it pops off the page, because you see whether it's the Old or the New Testament, you see God at work and then you marry that to your daily life of what you see spiritually, and you know, and the real world almost made less sense than the world I would see every day, in this battle. So I was
Yeah,
more I was more used to seeing the supernatural than I was dealing with, everyday life. So,
I can relate. It's like, yeah, all this, and then I have to do my taxes. Like,
mm-hmm,
it's just like, you
totally.
know, um, wow. So, what about backlash? Just, are you a target, or was your dad, was he a target? Was he targeted by Satan has his minions
Yeah.
in demonic form, and then he has his willing participants, like your dad was for a while, and they get weaponized. I've heard stories, where covens, for example, they'll have assignments. Have you ever had to deal with anything like that, organized attack from people working on behalf of the demonic?
Yeah, there's been both. I mean, for my dad, there's been both, and a lot of it. One, like you mentioned, the covens back where we lived, there was, like it turned out there was a coven in the town over from us, of 12, and they were assigned by Anton LaVey, and they worked with him for the area for a control over a geography. One of them somehow heard about my dad, wanted out, came to him. God used him to bring him to Christ. And so now, like the 12 that were there were now 11. And Anton LaVey heard about that specifically and went down and met apparently with these 11, and they put a curse on my dad. And my dad got really, really sick for quite some time until someone from the coven talked to the other person that was freed. He became freed also and was able to share with my dad their assignment from Anton LaVey for my dad specifically because of what God had used him for with this one within the coven. And so that's how he tied together this incredible sickness, and physical manifestation on him through this person because they came back and said, I learned that they put a curse on you. They were assigned to destroy you. And so that's one extreme example. Um, Other parts is because of my dad's work over all these years, he's caused a lot of damage in Satan's realm. And, um, consequently, there's been a lot of attacks, on my dad's health. I mean, some would say it's just life, but it's been, I know it's not. I've seen, too much, too many things that have been a result of, attacks out of their rage, on my dad. And, so yeah.
I think about this more than most people. Witchcraft, curses, how much power is granted the enemy over me? You know, would be follower of Christ, but flawed as I am, how much ground do I allow them for influence manipulation in my life, right? And it's I say more than most people. There was a time when that was, not an uncommon line of thought, right? Just obviously we think of Salem and again there was this sort of witchcraft hysteria where the history that we're told is that people who were had qualms with their neighbors, um, you know, and couldn't explain why their goat's milk had blood in it, you know, because they didn't have the science or whatever. That's where this notion of witchcraft comes from. That's what we're taught. But if you look at cultures, if you look at real people today, modern people and modern cultures, it's still a very prevalent uh practice, witchcraft, curse relief, all like um so I'm here in Houston, and I know I can go uh to a certain part of town and have a meeting with someone to help me be relieved of a curse, right?
Hmm.
Um and what is the reality of that, It's is there a space for that biblically, right? And I guess trying to remember scripturally. I think it's in there,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, yeah, they put,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, there's, I don't know the scriptures offhand, but yeah, there's many stories that speak of curses, of, idol worship and, the commitment to the idol to do such and such on the people of the Lord or on this person or, people visiting witches. Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of, and I don't mean millions, but there are plenty of examples to justify that reality then, which would, I mean, it's still here because, Satan is the same entity longing to destroy and curse people. And if you do enough research, that type of stuff is everywhere around here.
Yeah. The stories are out there too. Fascinating stories that defy all logic. Like,
Yeah.
you know, uh, somebody's sick in a somebody's sick in the hospital bed, and the grandmother, this consults a bruja, and they say, well, go to the northeast corner of your property and dig 2 feet and you'll find a bottle with some hair and a tooth in it.
Yeah.
Get drunk and throw it in the ocean. And then that person miraculously recovers.
Yep.
That's a real story. And
Yeah.
there are like thousands of those stories. What
Yep.
is that? What is that? And is that so that's a curse, right? So it's like again, it's like we have to wonder how how susceptible was Bob? How much of what happened to Bob and his leftward movement was
Mm.
Bob, and how much was the result of someone else's will? Basically, I guess the procedure is like if you're a witch or a bruja or a Satanist or a pagan or a Wiccan, you you want something accomplished. My will be done, right? The Christian can't do that. We just have to say, your will be done. I hope it's good.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. And of
Yep.
course, it is always good. It's better than we could ever imagine for ourselves, but that's hard to do.
Yeah.
So we want our will to be done, right? And so, okay, well, if you're the enemy, if the devil, if you are the demonic and you want to ensnare someone, you create this system of granting them their will instead of God's will, right? And it's in that context that this idea of cursing is facilitated, I think, right?
Yep.
And so just to think it through, like let's just say it, a witch recited these words, even though she didn't know, what that it's actually, Beelzebub who's gonna or some minion is gonna go and do her work for her, right? But in the case of like your father's illness, that's where it gets tricky. And that's where we have to look back to the Job conversation, right? So
Hmm.
it's like there is this element of God's allowing the demonic to enact the will of a person living in sin, and it's this weird dance, right?
Yep.
And the thing that makes me comfortable with it, I'm not saying I have my head around it, but the thing that makes me, it gives me space to allow for God to use my body as a pawn in this game where the stake is the soul. Ultimately, my body's not the most important thing, you know?
Yeah.
So if my body is a chess move, some move is made and it impacts me physically, your dad becomes sick because the will of some wicked person and the act of some demon. Um, the good that come of that is greater than the bad that was done to his body. That's what I believe on a spiritual level, right? Or
Yep.
else God wouldn't have allowed it.
Yeah, I mean,
And, and
you could use my dad's entire story of, those 2 years of his willful journey into hell, and paint that against the over 4 decades that he's used my dad to minister to thousands of people to bring them into the light of the kingdom because of his, dark experience. He used my dad's flesh and his will so that he could see and understand a world that very few do, so that then he could then take that experience and bring, thousands of people into freedom, into the truth, and overcome Satan by allowing Satan to use him for a brief time.
yeah, it's fascinating. So somehow in that discussion, I become comfortable with the idea and the reality of curses. But, if
I
you
don't
talk
like
these,
him, but yeah,
yeah, I don't like them, but you talk these things out, and it's like, well, God's will be done. Whatever you allow to happen to me, like where was I when you made Megalodon, or whatever he told
yeah,
Job,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, I trust you. I trust
yeah,
you, and bless those who curse me. That's
yep,
a tough one.
very,
But isn't that what he said?
yep,
Yeah. Interesting though, the notion of curses.
yeah, very.
Well, let's end on your note. I'm gonna let you wrap us up.
I was gonna say I've got to pick up my back to real life. Got to pick up my daughter here soon. So,
Yeah, just I'm gonna give you some time to close it, and then I'll thank you profusely. Well,
sure. Is there anything particular that you want me to hit? I mean, I've got some ideas, but is there?
no, you just go, and then I'm gonna put links, and I'll reiterate, the book. I just got my email yesterday that it had been shipped, the hard
Oh,
copy.
really? Okay.
Yeah. Um,
Okay.
so it took a little while, but I
Where'd
also
you order it from? Amazon or
no,
Zulon or?
Zulon. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's
I,
probably why.
well, I ordered one of each. I did it Amazon so I can do a review.
Oh,
But it's
cool.
like I
Thank you.
don't. Yeah, well, it's the Kindle because I got a Kindle through Amazon for the purpose of leaving a review, and then I wanted to order the hard copy from Zulon as we discussed.
Thank you.
But that all that to say, I haven't read it yet. But I'm and I just don't like reading on this. Like I downloaded
Yeah.
the Kindle app and I'm just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think something's going on with my eyes because I'm already doing too much screen time. But
Mm,
I want the paper,
yeah.
so,
I'm the
so
same.
hopefully it'll be here this week.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, uh, that quote from C.S. Lewis that we talked about, either talk too much about it or too little. And my call is to be right in the middle of that, to share this story. That's where I feel it is the most necessary for the church and for the world. That people, like, there was if I could read, um, actually, it's a quote within my book from George Eldon Ladd, and I think this is so important. If I could read this kind of sums up why I wrote the book.
Yeah, please.
But it says the exorcisms of demons was no mere periphery activity in Jesus' ministry, but was a manifestation of the essential purpose of the coming of the kingdom of God into this evil age. We must recognize in the exorcism of demons a consciousness on the part of Jesus of engaging in an actual conflict with the spirit world, a conflict that lay at the heart of his messianic mission. The demonic is absolutely essential in understanding Jesus' interpretation of the picture of sin and of humanity's need for the kingdom of God. At the very heart of our Lord's mission is the need of rescuing people from bondage to the satanic kingdom and of bringing them into the sphere of God's kingdom. As we look at history, what we see is often not merely the impersonal and unmeaning, but the irrational and the mad. The face that looks through at us is akin often to the insane. Certainly, as Jesus looked at people, he saw them not always as rational moral units or self contained autonomous spirits. He saw their souls as a battleground, an arena, or a theater of tragic conflict between the opposed cosmic powers of the Holy Spirit of God and Satan. From George Eldon Ladd. And I just think that's so important in what, my heart is that people know this battle is real even though it's ugly, even though it's hard to fathom. I mean, you know, watch The Matrix. That's kind of the long version of the story, but there is another world that exists around us that is more real than the one that we live, and it's at war for our souls, and it's Satan and God. God obviously has the final victory. But Satan does have influence here, and we as Christians and non-believers need to understand that there's a fight going on for our souls, whether we want to believe it or not, and God fights on our behalf, whether we want him to or not. And the more we realize that, for me, the more personal God becomes, because I realize, as I've seen in countless of people, and I've seen in my own life, that he fights for me, he fights with me, and I get to engage in that with him. There are good days and there are bad days, but ultimately, God is the victor, and that's the most exciting part of this whole thing, is that we get to be on that side if we choose to. I'll end there.
Brilliant. Are you engaged in this currently? Is this a part of your day-to-day life now?
No, I mean it's something that I just actually tried to avoid for 20 years because I wanted to keep it from my own kids, knowing the weight of it. But then I also wanted my oldest, who just got back from college at the time, she was going away to college. I wanted her and my other daughters to understand the heritage that comes with them through my dad, and understand, as they start to really explore their faith, the reality of this battle. And so that's when I started to re-engage, wrote the book. It just was released March, I think, in March. So I'm just engaging in the storytelling of this reality through my book and through people like you who are generous enough to give me the time to tell it. So,
It's a fascinating story, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. I should say, um, I encountered your story first on the Exorcist files,
that's right.
which that was a really it's a big time show, huge audience, and they did a great job. I thought interviewing you, and you did a
Yeah,
great
Ryan did a
job.
great job.
Yeah. Um, so I'll put a link to that show also at the bottom of the show notes, or
Okay,
maybe not.
awesome.
Yeah. No, I will. And we'll put links to the three links to your book. Can you just hold that book up?
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah. So the full title is The Blue Lady, My Personal Encounter with Dark Angels, Demons,
And
and
spiritual
Spiritual Warfare
warfare. Yep,
by Rick Hansen.
yep.
And is that the painting on the cover?
No, I mean that was destroyed.
Oh, that's
So
right. Yeah.
this was about the 10th attempt of an artist to do it, and this seemed to be the closest.
Okay. All right, Rick, do me one more favor.
Yeah.
A listener sent me a painting. I want you to have a look at it and just tell me how it strikes you. Are you
Oh,
down?
really? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, sure.
All right.
Sure.
Okay. There's an interesting backstory here, but be for another time.
Mm,
What do you see? That third eye is a little troubling. Where is
yeah.
there? But
Yeah.
I mean, are you getting anything off of this?
No, no, I mean, nothing strikes me. It just seems possibly spiritual with the eyes, especially the third eye.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah, I feel something. I feel something. I don't know. I'll tell you about that another time.
Okay.
Uh, thank you so much, Rick.
No,
Really,
thank you, man.
I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you. You've been so generous with your time and your story. And yeah, you're a great storyteller.
Thank you.
I can't wait to read the book.
Awesome.
All
Well,
right.
thank you. And thanks for your time, and thanks for giving me the platform to tell a story.
It's been my pleasure. All right.
Awesome.